about the Texas nursing jurisprudence and ethics concept. You have to read and understand this so that you can pass the nursing jurisprudence test so that you can get your APP or authorization to test. Even though the test is an open book test, some of you may prefer to listen to the lecture before actually taking the test. I will also give you links to the different laws and rules that are mentioned in this talk so that you can have access to them and read them on your own. So let's start. And let's start by talking about the purpose of the Texas Board of Nursing position statements. Nursing Practice Acts have a long history in the United States, with the first standards being enacted in the early 1900s. In 1907, 19 nurses from around the state of Texas formed what is known as the Texas Graduate Nurses Association in Fort Worth. These women had a collective interest in establishing standards for the delivery of nursing care and creating a nursing board. Using recent Colorado legislation as a model, the Graduate Nurses Association advocated for nursing legislation in Texas. The Nursing Registration Act of 1909, which is an early version of the Nursing Practice Act, passed the Texas legislature, and thus the Board of Nurse Examiners, which became the Board of Nursing in 2007, was created. The Texas Nursing Practice Act has undergone extensive revision and amendments since 1909. Legislated to safeguard the public, its purpose is to ensure that minimum safety requirements are met by every nurse practicing in the United States or in the state of Texas. The Nursing Practice Act, Chapter 301 of the Texas Occupation Code, includes laws and rules regulating nursing education, licensure, and practice. Chapter 301 establishes the Texas Board of Nursing as an authority to adopt rules, develop standards for nursing programs, and discipline nurses who violate regulations. Nurses who fall below the board's requirement minimum competency, who present a danger to patients, co-workers, or others, or who fail to comply with all Board of Nursing rules, will be prohibited from working in the state of Texas. In addition to Chapter 301, which is the Nursing Practice Act, the Board of Nursing stipulates that Texas nurses are required to be familiar with Chapter 303, which is the Nursing Peer Review, and Chapter 304, which is the Nurse Licensure Compact. Advanced practice registered nurses must also be familiar with Chapter 305, the Advanced Practice Registered Nurse Compact. Several chapters of the Texas Administrative Code, which is a collection of all state agency rules, also pertain to nursing education, licensure, practice, and discipline. Together, these laws and rules form the basis for the legal practice of nursing and the regulation of nursing by the state of Texas. Although they are not technically laws, the Texas Board of Nursing position statement provide guidance regarding patient safety, scope of practice, and other important issues. The board strongly encourages that nurses read all position statements, or at the very least, the summary of position statements. Like I said at the beginning, I will provide a copy or a link to those statements. Texas nurses must be also familiar with the principles of nursing ethics and have a firm understanding of professional boundaries. This program, will give you the information about jurisprudence and ethics related to the practice of nursing in Texas for all levels of nursing, including registered nurses, or RNs, licensed vocational nurses, or LVNs, registered nurse assistants, or RNFAs, and advanced practice registered nurses. While this course will provide you an overview of several pertinent sections of the laws and rules, you are required to have up-to-date knowledge of them in their entirety in order to ensure compliance, retain licensure, and practice safely. Let's talk now about the standards of nursing practice. The basic standards of competent practice directly impact how all nurses in Texas provide care. Not only must the nurse possess the knowledge of local and current care standards, but the knowledge must be demonstrated through consistent practice and intervention to prevent unauthorized, inappropriate, erroneous, illegal, contraindicated, or intentional non-performance of care. The Nursing Practice Act governs the practice of LVNs, RNs, APRNs, and RNFAs. LVNs are those persons licensed to practice vocational nursing, while registered nurses, APRNs, and RNFAs are all licensed to practice professional nursing with various levels of specialization. Both professional and vocational nurses are responsible and accountable for making decisions that are based upon their education preparation and experience in nursing. Let's start explaining the position statements for licensed vocational nursing, or rather the Nursing Practice Act as it relates to licensed vocational nursing. According to the Texas Nursing Practice Act, the practice of vocational nursing is defined as a directed scope of nursing practice, including the performance of an act that requires specialized judgment and skill, the proper performance of which is based on knowledge and application of the principles of biology, physical, and social science, as acquired by a completed course in an approved school of vocational nursing. The term does not include acts of medical diagnosis or the prescription of therapeutic or corrective measures. Vocational nursing involves collecting data and performing focused nursing assessment of the health status of an individual. Listen, it's just collecting the data and focused nursing assessment, not a comprehensive, thorough nursing assessment. Participate in the planning of the nursing care needed of an individual. They just participate. They don't do it. They don't create it. That's things. Participate in the development and modification of the nursing care plan. Participate in health teaching and counseling to promote, attain, and maintain an optimal health individual. Assisting in the evaluation of an individual response to a nursing intervention and the identification of an individual's needs. Engage in other acts that require education and training as prescribed by board rules and policies, commensurate with the nurse's experience, continuing education, and demonstrated competency. If you pay attention in everything, they participate, but they are not the lead. Most commonly, the RN is the lead. That's us. Additionally, the Board of Nursing and the Nursing Practice Act state that an LVN requires appropriate supervision of an RN, APRN, physician assistant, physician, dentist, or podiatrist. The LVN is required to function within the parameters of the legal scope of practice and in accordance with the federal, state, and local laws, rules and regulations, and policies, procedures, and guidelines of the employing healthcare institution or practice setting. LVNs are responsible for providing safe, compassionate, and focused nursing care to assign patients with predictable healthcare needs. That is, few with predictable healthcare needs. If the needs are unpredictable, then you cannot assign those patients to the LVN. Professional nursing. The practice of professional nursing is defined as the performance of an act that requires substantial, specialized judgment and skill, the proper performance of which is based on knowledge and application of the principles of biology, physical, and social science as acquired by a completed course in an approved school of professional nursing. The term does not include acts of medical diagnosis or the prescription of therapeutic or corrective measures. That means we nurses cannot prescribe and we nurses cannot diagnose. I'm telling you this because as Mexican nurses, many times our friends and family may come to us asking us what we think about this. We cannot give a diagnosis and we cannot suggest that they take this medication or that medication, at least not in the United States, because that is considered prescribing. Be careful when you act on those things when you are in United States territory. Observation, assessment, intervention, evaluation, rehabilitation, care and counsel or health teachings of a person who is ill, injured, infirm, or experiencing a change in normal health processes. That's part of what is involved as a professional nursing. Also, administration of a medication or treatment as ordered by a physician, podiatrist, or dentist. Maintenance of health or prevention of illness, performance of an act delegated by a physician, the development of the nursing care plan, supervision or teaching of nursing, administration, supervision, and evaluation of nursing practices, policies, and procedures, requesting, receiving, signing for, and distribution of prescription drug samples to patients at practices at which an APRN is authorized to sign prescription drug orders. The Board of Nursing further defines the scope of practice of professional nursing. The RN takes responsibility and accepts accountability for practicing within the legal scope of practice and is prepared to work in all healthcare settings and may engage in independent nursing practice without supervision by another healthcare provider. The RN, with focus on patient safety, is required to function within the parameters of the legal scope of practice and in accordance with the federal, state, and local laws, rules and regulations, and policies, procedures, and guidelines of the employing healthcare institution or practice setting. The RN is responsible for providing safe, compassionate, and comprehensive nursing care to patients and their families with complex healthcare needs. Advanced practice registered nursing are registered nurses who have completed additional accredited advanced practice education and internship as recognized by the Board of Nursing. The Board of Nursing specifies that APRNs must practice within their individual scope in the advanced role, meaning the particular specialty and population focus that the nurse trained for in an advanced program. In the United States, we have APRNs in the areas of pediatric, family nurse practitioner, adult nurse practitioner, OBGYN nurse practitioner, mental health nurse practitioner, critical care, and others. Therefore, those are the areas where they can practice. The Board of Nursing specifies that APRN must practice within their scope in the advanced rule. The scope of practice may be defined by APRN organizations. However, in many instances, it can be up to the APRN's employer or supervision to determine what duties he or she can perform and what types of patients can be treated. This decision may be based on the nurse's clinical experience and knowledge, skills, and competencies. APRNs may or may not practice the full scope of their professional role and specialty for which they are trained. And an APRN is allowed to perform the full scope of duties of an RN. The board suggests asking the following questions in order to help decide if an activity is within an individual APRN scope of practice. Is it consistent with the scope of one's recognized title, or does it evolve into another advanced practice title recognized by the board, requiring additional formal education and legal recognition? Is it consistent with the standards of nursing practice outlined in the Board Rule 217.11? Are you willing to accept accountability and liability for the activity and the outcomes? Is it consistent with one's education in the role and specialty? Is it consistent with one's professional scope of practice? Is it consistent with reasonable and prudent practice? Is it consistent with statutory and regulatory laws? Is it consistent with evidence-based care? APRNs may delegate tasks to RNs and LVNs, but the task must be within the RN or LVN scope of practice. The Texas Board of Nursing states in Position Statement 15.18 that RNs are expected to carry out orders issued by APRNs if the orders are within the APRN scope of practice for their specialty. RNs are expected to question an order if it is believed to be non-efficacious or contraindicated. In what instances should the nurse be reported to the board? In addition to the Nursing Practice Act, there are several chapters of the Texas Administrative Code, chapters 211 through 228, that contain rules pertaining to nursing. Texas Administrative Code Rule 217.11, Standards of Nursing Practice, contains the minimum acceptable standard for all licensed nurses. It states that the Board of Nursing is responsible for regulating the practice of nursing within the state of Texas for LVNs, RNs, and APRNs, and that action against the nurse's license may result from failure to meet the minimum acceptable level of practice, even if no patient injury results from a nurse's action or inaction. All nurses practicing in Texas must meet the minimum acceptable standards specified in Rule 217.11, which includes requirements to know and conform to the Texas Nursing Practice Act and the Texas Board of Rules and the Texas Board's rules and regulations, or regulations affecting the nurse's current area of practice. Implement measures to promote a safe environment for clients and others. Know the rationale for and the effects of medications and treatments and correctly administer the same. Accurately and completely report and document the client's status, including signs and symptoms, nursing care rendered, physician, dentist, or podiatrist orders, administration of medications and treatments, client responses, and contacts with other healthcare team members concerning significant events regarding client status. Respect the client's right to privacy by protecting confidential information unless required or allowed by law to disclose the information. Promote and participate in education and counseling to our clients, and where applicable, the family's significant other based on health needs. Obtain instruction and supervision as necessary when implementing nursing procedures or practices. Make a reasonable effort to obtain orientation, training for competency when encountering new equipment and technology or unfamiliar care situation. These last two items specify that you as a nurse is your responsibility to get training or supervision whenever you are in an unfamiliar situation. Don't do things that you're not familiar with or you don't know how to do it. Look for training. It is your responsibility. If you accept it and make a mistake, whether you injure the patient or not, it was your responsibility because you did not voice that you needed supervision or training. Notify the appropriate supervisor when leaving the nursing assignment. Even if you're going to take a break, do not just leave the floor. You have to give report to another person so that that person can take care of your patients while you're out. Even if you go to a meeting that you have been designated a representative for your unit, or if you go to classes, or whatever, whenever you leave the floor, you have to make sure you give report. Otherwise, it is considered abandonment. Know, recognize, and maintain professional boundaries of the nurse-client relationship. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Comply with mandatory reporting requirements of Texas Occupation Code Chapter 301, which is the Nursing Practice Act, Subchapter 1, which includes a reporting a nurse who violates the Nursing Practice Act or a board rule, except for minor incidents as stated in the Nursing Practice Act and board rules. It contributed to the death or serious injury of a patient whose conduct causes a person to suspect that the nurse's practice is impaired by chemical dependency or drug or alcohol abuse, whose actions constitute abuse, exploitation, fraud, or a violation of professional boundaries, or whose actions indicate that the nurse lacks knowledge, skill, judgment, or conscientious to such an extent that the nurse's continued practice could reasonably be expected to pose a risk of harm to a patient or another person, regardless of whether the conduct consists of a single incident or a pattern behavior. Provide without discrimination nursing services regardless of the age, disability, economic status, gender, national origin, race, religion, health problems, or sexual orientation of the client served. Institute appropriate nursing interventions that might be recognized to stabilize a client's condition and or prevent complications. Clarify any order or treatment regimen that the nurse has reason to believe is inaccurate, non-efficacious, or contraindicated by consulting with the appropriate licensed practitioner and notifying the ordering practitioner when the decision is made not to administer the medication or treatment. Implement measures to prevent exposure to infectious pathogens and communicable diseases. Collaborate with the client, members of the healthcare team, and, when appropriate, the client's significant others in the interest of the client's healthcare. Consult with, utilize, and make referrals to appropriate community agencies and healthcare resources to provide continuity of care. Be responsible for one's own continued competency in nursing practice and individual professional growth. Make assignments to others that take into consideration client safety that are commensurate with the educational preparation, experience, knowledge, and physical and emotional ability of the person to whom the assignment are made. Accept only those nursing assignments that take into consideration client safety and that are commensurate with the nurse's education, preparation, experience, knowledge, and physical and emotional ability. Supervise nursing care provided by others for whom the nurse is professionally responsible. Ensure the verification of current Texas licensure or other compact state licensure privilege and credentials of personnel for whom the nurse is administratively responsible when acting in the role of nurse administrator. As noted, nurses are required to be familiar with all standards of nursing practice. I'm going to put the link to Chapter 217 of the Texas Administrative Code for Rule 217.11 in its entirety. Now let's talk about ethical and legal issues in nursing practice. In addition to their legal obligations, nurses have ethical obligations to their patients. The practice of nursing is primarily one of caring, and the ethical theories of nursing are often referred to as the ethics of caring. Nurses are expected to address both ethical and legal issues in their practice, which can be complex. As medical advancements and new technology progress, these must be incorporated into established ethical standards. The American Nurses Association has established the Code of Ethics for Nurses, which is intended to act as a framework for nurses to use in ethical analysis and decision-making. The full text of the code will be available in one of the links in this program. Major ethical issues that may arise in the practice of nursing are related to the provision of patient-centered care, advocacy, delegation, self-care, and supporting colleagues in the profession. Ethical concepts central to patient-centered care include advocacy, confidentiality, privacy, self-determination, and the dignity and worth of all persons. Ethical concepts central to nursing practice include accountability, for example, accepting responsibility for one's action or inaction, beneficence, which is the duty to do good, competence, which is only performing duties within one's scope of practice, acquiring new skills and education, non-maleficence, which is the duty to do no harm, veracity, which is to always say the truth, and social reform, which is advocating for patients and groups. Additionally, as a nurse gains experience in his or her field and specialty, the ethic of teaching comes into play. This can simply involve helping an inexperienced nurse grow by passing along knowledge, or can involve more specific leadership, supervisory, or teaching roles. Several ethical issues are addressed in the Texas Board of Nursing Position statements, and this includes the issue of initiation of cardiopulmonary resuscitation, or CPR, in long-term care residents in the absence of a do not resuscitate order. For example, when initiation of CPR will appear futile and inappropriate during the nursing assessment of the resident, despite the premise that a DNR order may only be given by a physician. Other ethical issues discussed in the position statement include care of those with whom the nurse has a personal relationship and issues of patient confidentiality and privacy with regard to the use of social media. Regarding and discussion about ethics and potential ethical dilemmas can help nurses respond appropriately and can help prevent unethical behaviors from occurring in the workplace. There are also a variety of legal issues that affect the provision of nursing care and maintenance of a nursing license. It is important to note that although possibly related, the laws governing nursing practice are different from the ethical framework that nurses use to guide decision-making. Laws pertaining to documentation, licensure, and standards of care have been established to ensure that nurses practice within a defined scope of practice and are aware of the boundaries of independent nursing action and responsibilities. These laws also act to hold nurses accountable for maintaining an acceptable standard of patient care. However, perhaps the greatest legal concern for nurses is the threat of negligence or malpractice claims. The tort or medical malpractice liability system is intended to provide deterrence to clinicians who willfully or negligently injure patients. Deterrence is theoretically achieved by holding practitioners legally liable for their actions or omissions. According to tort law, there are 4 elements that have to be established for a rule of malpractice. That is, all 4 elements have to be present for a person to be accused of negligence or malpractice. Number 1, duty. The nurse owed a duty to meet a particular standard of care. That is, you were assigned that duty. The patient was your patient. You were taking care of that patient. Number 2, breach of duty. The nurse failed to perform the owed duty. So the patient was yours, the task was yours, you were either delegated or assigned, and you either didn't do it or didn't do it correctly. Number 3, causation. There is a causal connection between the nurse's failure and the patient's injury. That is, we can prove that what you did is exactly what caused the injury in the patient. And number 4, damages. An injury occurred for which monetary compensation is an adequate relief. These elements must be shown by a preponderance of the evidence, defined as more than 50% probability. This is a lower standard than the beyond a reasonable doubt using criminal law. Malpractice cases are decided on the basis of what a jury is likely to think is fact, rather than actual fact. That is, that it's given the evidence, the jury will decide if there was malpractice or not. I cannot stress enough the importance of documentation as your main basis for ensuring that you document everything that you have done and that what you have done was not the cause, that you were not negligent in providing the care. Now, let's talk a little bit about professional boundaries and unprofessional conduct. Another facet of ethical care and practice involves maintaining appropriate limits in the nurse-patient relationship. Based on the idea that there is an imbalance of power and potential for abuse in this relationship, due to the nurse's power and the patient's vulnerability. The state of Texas requires all nurses to be familiar with and abide by the laws and rules regarding the limits of the nurse-patient relationship. Nurses should strive to promote the patient's best interests, dignity, and independence, and refrain from inappropriate involvement in the patient's personal relationship and or the obtainment of personal gain at the expense of the patient. Violating professional boundaries of the nurse-patient relationship includes, but is not limited to, emotional, financial, physical, or sexual exploitation of the patient or the patient's family. These violations and other types of unprofessional conduct are grounds for disciplinary action by the board. The state of Texas defines unprofessional conduct in Texas Administrative Code Rule 217.12 as unprofessional or dishonorable behaviors of a nurse that the board believes are likely to deceive, defraud, or injure clients or the public. These behaviors include, but are not limited to, unsafe practice included but not limited to, carelessly failing, repeatedly failing, or exhibiting an inability to perform vocational, registered, or advanced practice nursing in conformity with the standards of minimum acceptable level of nursing practice set out in Rule 217.11. Carelessly or repeatedly failing to conform to generally accepted nursing standards in applicable practice settings. Improper management of client records. Delegating or assigning nursing functions or a prescribed health function when the delegation or assignment could reasonably be expected to result in unsafe or ineffective client care. Accepting the assignment of nursing functions or a prescribed health function when the acceptance of the assignment could be reasonably expected to result in unsafe or ineffective client care. Failing to supervise the performance of tasks by any individual working pursuant to the nurse's delegation or assignment. I just want to emphasize that this is your responsibility. If you have patients and you delegate a task or you assign a task, you retain responsibility. So make sure that you are delegating or assigning to a person who can competently complete the task. Failure of a clinical nursing instructor to adequately supervise or to assure adequate supervision of student practices. Failure of a chief administrative nurse to follow appropriate and recognized standards and guidelines in providing oversight of the nursing organization and nursing services for which the nurse is administratively responsible. Failure to practice within a modified scope of practice or with the required accommodations specified by the board in granting a coded license or by stipulated agreement with the board. Careless or repetitive conduct that may endanger a client's life, health, safety, whether or not actual injury to a client is established. inability to practice safely as defined by demonstration of actual or potential inability to practice nursing with reasonable skill and safety to clients by reason of illness, use of alcohol, drugs, chemicals, or other mood-altering substances, or as a result of any mental or physical condition. What it means is that you should not be working if you are impaired by emotions. Maybe something happened at home and you are out there and not thinking clearly. Maybe it's a mental or physical condition, whether it's stress, depression, or something else. Whether it is by the use of alcohol, drugs, or any chemicals that may alter your mood, any of those. If you cannot work thinking clearly, it's better for you to call in and not come to work. Misconduct, including but not limited to falsifying reports, client documentation, agency records, or other documents. Failing to cooperate with a local investigation conducted by the board. Causing or permitting physical, emotional, or verbal abuse or injury or neglect to the client or the public, or failing to report the same to the employer, appropriate legal authority, and or the licensing board. That is, that if you witness something, you have to report it. If you don't, then you're part of it. Violating professional boundaries of the nurse-client relationship, including but not limited to physical, sexual, emotional, or financial exploitation of the client or the client's significant other. Engaging in sexual conduct with a client, touching a client in sexual manner, requesting or offering sexual favors, or language or behavior suggestive of the same. That's why I always suggest that whenever we as nurses have to do some task involving the private parts of the client, please get somebody of the client's same sex to be with you. You have to have another witness. Whether it doesn't matter if the client and you are the same sex, because nowadays we never know. So whenever you're going to be working in an area that is private, please provide privacy for the patient, but at the same time, provide protection for you by asking somebody else to come and be your witness, be with you, so that the patient may feel more comfortable. Obviously, you have to ask the client for permission first. Misappropriating in connection with the practice of nursing anything of value or benefit, including but not limited to any property, real or personal, of the client, employer, or any other person or entity, or failing to take precautions to prevent such misappropriation. What I have seen in practice many times is that the client may have some candies in the next door at the bedside, and the nurses may just help themselves. The patient may be okay with it, but you have to be very careful what you take from the patient bedside. Providing information that was false, deceptive, or misleading in connection with the practice of nursing. Failing to answer a specific question or providing false or misleading answers that will have affected the decision to license, employ, certify, or otherwise utilize a nurse. Offering, giving, soliciting, or receiving, or agreeing to receive directly or indirectly any fee or other consideration to or from a third party for the referral of a client in connection with the performance of a professional service. Failure to repay a guaranteed student loan as provided in the Texas Education Code 57.491. Or to pay child support payments as required by the Texas Family Code 232.001. Diversion or attempts to divert drugs or controlled substances. Dismissal from a board-approved peer assistance program for non-compliance and referral by the program to the board. Other drug-related actions or conduct, including but not limited to the use of controlled substance, any of it, or any drug prescribed or unprescribed, any device or alcoholic beverages while on duty or on call, and to the extent that such use may impair the nurse's ability to safely conduct to the public the practice authorized by the nursing practice. Unfortunately, we see a high incidence of alcohol and substance abuse by the nursing and other healthcare professions. Falsification of or making incorrect, inconsistent, or unintelligible entries in any agency, client, or other record pertaining to drugs or controlled substances. Failing to follow the policy and procedure in place for the wastage of medications at the facility where the nurse was employed or working at the time of the incident. A positive drug screen for which there is no lawful prescription. Obtaining or attempting to obtain or deliver medications through means of misrepresentation, fraud, forgery, deception, and or subterfuge. Unlawful practice including but not limited to knowingly aiding, assisting, advising, or allowing an unlicensed person to engage in the unlawful practice of vocational, registered, or advanced practice nursing. Violating an order of the board, carelessly or repeatedly violating a state or federal law relating to the practice of vocational, registered, or advanced practice nursing, or violating a state or federal narcotics or controlled substance law. Knowingly aiding, assisting, advising, or allowing a nurse under board order to violate the conditions set forth in the order. Failing to report violations of the Nursing Practice Act and or the board's rules and regulations. Leaving nursing assignment, including a supervisory assignment without notifying the appropriate personnel. Criminal conduct, included but not limited to conviction or probation with or without an adjudication of guilt. Receipt of a judicial order involving a crime or criminal behavior or conduct that will affect the practice of nursing. Wow, that's a mouthful. Next is workplace violence. In 2018, the board issued a new position statement addressing workplace violence. It is important for the interprofessional team to work collaboratively in support of an effective violence prevention program. This includes acknowledging the value of a safe, violence-free workplace, ensuring and exhibiting equal commitment to the safety and health of workers and patients, and maintaining a system of accountability for all involved members of the healthcare team. Now let's talk about the use of social media. The issue of exploitive or inappropriate use of patient information or images on social media is becoming increasingly significant. As discussed, the Board of Nursing Position Statement 15.29, use of social media by nurses, offers clarification on the relevant ethical and legal issues regarding this topic, including the use of social media as a beneficial tool for nurses and patients alike. The statement emphasizes that confidentiality and privacy extend to online posts or conversations, and more specifically, that patient-related images are not to be transmitted via electronic media, regardless of whether the patient is identified by name. Taking photo or video of patients with personal devices, including cell phones, is prohibited. Images taken for legitimate purpose, using employer-provided devices, may be allowed based on employer's policy. Use caution when having online social contact with patients or former patients. The fact that a patient may initiate contact with the nurse does not permit a personal relationship. Let me say that again. We as nurses are not allowed to have a personal relationship with a patient or a former patient. For the full text of all these position statements, I'm going to, like I said before, provide the links in the classroom as stated before. In conclusion, it is the responsibility of the Texas Board of Nursing to enforce the rules regulating the practice of nursing as the rules are currently stated, not how individuals may wish them to be. As nurses are affected by these rules and regulations, they have the responsibility to keep informed of regulatory changes in order to maintain licensure. It should also be remembered that practicing within the minimum standards, though a necessity, is not all that is expected of nurses. Fulfilling ethical obligations to patients, co-workers, employers, and society is also an important part of healthcare. And it is only when the regulatory and ethical aspects of practice are combined that a nurse can be fully effective. Thank you for listening, and I hope that this was beneficial to you. Shalom.